So here we are, part 2 of the Wump world. We left off where there was more and more noise and more of everything, more buildings with more smokestacks puffing more and more smoke, more freeways with more traffic shooting out more and more clouds of exhaust, more trash and more trash piles with more and more waste gushing into the rivers and lakes. Pretty soon, the cities were so clouded by the factory smoke and the fumes from the freeways, the pollutions could hardly breathe. They went sneezing and wheezing about the streets, grouching and grumbling and blaming one another for the awful mess they were in. Meanwhile, who created that mess? One day, an angry crowd gathered outside the World Tower building, demanding to see the World Chief. When the chief appeared on his balcony, all the pollutions began shouting at once. We can't breathe the air. We can't drink the water. And we can't stand the noise. We've had enough. Kerchoo! Sneezed the chief. I know just how you feel, and something will be done at once, I promise. With no time to lose, the chief called for a meeting with his 3 top outer spacemen. Gentlemen, he said, this world of ours has gone sour. We've got to get out of here quick. But first we must find a new world, a better one. That's your job, men, so get going. Righto, Chief, barked the men, and within 15 minutes they were at the spaceport aboard their spaceships. Then, zwoosh, 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 the men took off in 3 directions, and in seconds they were zooming about in outer space at 7,000 miles an hour. Days passed with no word from the outer spacemen. After waiting a week, the world chief flew into a rage. Blast it all, he bellowed. What's keeping those blithering bubbleheads? Then one Monday morning, out of the dark, smudgy sky, swooshed one of the spaceships. As the ship touched down, the man hopped out shouting, I've done it! I've done it! I've found a new world! A bigger and better world! Nice going, lad, cried the world chief, and the crowd gathered at the spaceport, giving their hero one great rousing cheer, which ended in a fit of sneezing. In no time, the great news was sent flashing around the world over radio and TV, warning all pollutions to be packed and ready to go within 24 hours. At dawn the next day, the entire population swarmed into the space center and crowded aboard the giant spaceships. After double checking to make sure all pollutions were accounted for, the world chief gave the signal for blastoff. With a thunderous roar, the giant ships shot off the ground, kazoom, up and away through the smoke-blackened sky, and were gone. And at long last, peace and quiet settled over the Wump world. The sudden silence came as a shock to the Wumps. They could hardly believe their ears. Still, they wanted to take no chances, and so they remained in their caverns with ears cocked for the slightest sound. There's the space, the pollution's leaving, and the Wumps wondering. After a long, long silence, they decided it was time to go, and, led by the biggest Wump, they crept up the tunnel to the cave entrance to find it covered by a crust of cement. With one powerful push of his snout, the biggest Wump bumped his way through. Then, one by one, the Wumps waddled out onto a freeway and gaped in wide-eyed amazement. They had feared something awful was happening to their world, but this was much more than they could have imagined. They were staggered by the size of the huge buildings, with walls and walls of windows looming up on every side, and the broad layers of hard, flat crust covering the earth, which felt strangely cold to their feet. There was no sign of any tree or tuft of grass. Even the sky was gone. And the Wumps wondered if there was anything left for them. At least they must find out. They wandered the freeways for miles, only to find more and more buildings with endless heaps of wreckage and rubble. For all they could see, their world was completely ruined. Footsore and weary, the Wumps were about to give up and head back for their cave, when the biggest Wump let out a joyful Wump! That sounds hopeful. Just ahead of them was a grassy meadow with a clump of bumbershoot trees, all that was left of their lovely world. Wump, wumping for joy, the Wumps went bounding off the freeway out onto the meadow. Pretty soon, the hungry Wumps were munching away on the tall, tender grass. Now there was new hope for the Wumps. In time, the murky skies would clear up, and the rains would wash the scum from the rivers and lakes. The tall buildings would come tumbling down, and the freeways would crumble away. And in time, the green growth would wind its way up through the rubble, but the Wump world would never quite be the same. So this is called an allegory. It is a story that teaches us a lesson in a way about how we treat our own planet and how we need to be mindful of how we can give it new hope.